I wiped away the sweat that had built up on my brow and I continued typing. I controlled my breathing, attempting to resist the burning chokehold of the hot, stuffy air. Hundreds of computer servers, property of the Chinese state, simultaneously pumped out enough heat to knock out a bull. Usually, these places are cooled down to prevent the machines from blowing up in your face. I guess someone forgot to switch on the fans that morning. I took my laptop and I plugged it into one of the terminals. I carried out this routine so many times in the last few years I could probably do the whole thing with my eyes closed. Just like always, the search tab popped up and I typed in those same 2 words, Stacy Newman. I suppose you think it's a hell of an unusual thing to break into dozens of high-security server rooms across the world only to search up your own name, but as it goes, I'm one hell of an unusual person. The computer coughed up a few hundred results. Looks like somebody's been keeping tabs on me. The files were arranged in chronological order. I scrolled down through the years. A few entries of my escapades since 2019, loads on my time in Shadowwood, that's to be expected, and one on my arrest, the first thing I clearly remember. Then, like all other records in the world, it cut off at 2007. To everyone's knowledge, including my own, before the year 2007, I did not exist. So, welcome to my diary. My name is Stacy Newman, and I haven't got the faintest clue who I am. The 2 guards waved as I left the building. I smiled politely and waited until I turned the corner before tearing up my fake ID card and throwing it away. I clutched my coat tight as I walked down the street. I'd read that Shuaiding was frosty around this time of year, but as I'd never been to this part of China before, I wasn't really sure what to expect. I strolled through the cold streets, little paper lanterns and scarlet flags swaying above my head. As the sun set, the revelers began crawling out from their homes using their pricey shoes to kick aside the sludge that was last week's snow. No matter where you go in the world, New York to Nairobi, you'll find that all the worst people wear the long coat of night. Same goes for space. After all, what is space if not one endless night? I climbed the stairs of one of Shuaiding's many identical concrete towers and quietly pushed open a door on the 14th floor. The family of 3 who lived in that apartment were all crouched together in a corner, heads to the floor, praying. The oldest woman looked up. I placed a hunk of cash on the counter and nodded. She returned to her worship. That was how every interaction with them went. They all spoke Uyghur, you see. Now, I know quite a few languages, but I don't know Uyghur, but that didn't affect our agreement. Every few days I'd give them some money. In return, they let me stay in their spare room for a while. The room was nice enough. I'd stayed in worse places. It wasn't Buckingham Palace or anything. There was only just enough room for my bags and a bed, but it served its purpose. Besides, it wasn't like I was going to stay there much longer. The CCP server room I raided earlier in the day was the last place in the area I planned on checking out. Once I got the funds together, I was planning on heading up to Mongolia or Kazakhstan, seeing if I could find anything about myself there. Hell, who knows? Maybe run into my family. Talking about family, one of the only things I can remember from before I woke up in that prison cell is my mother's face. You could cook something sentimental from that, but I'm not going to because there's something else I remember. Something I know for sure. And that's that she's dead. I guess this ain't gonna be a real cheery book I'm writing. Her death must have meant a lot to me, though, if it stuck with me even though I've lost my memories of everything else. It must have had an impact. That's sort of what inspired me to write this diary, actually. My past is all chaos. A few half-remembered glimpses floating around in a glass of nothing. By putting it all down in words, I can take control of the present. I heard the family murmuring, hurried but hushed. I left the spare room just in time to catch them slinking out of sight. The living room was bathed in a harsh white light which peered through the small window in the door. Thump, 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 thump. A steady rhythm was drummed from outside, demanding to be let in. I cranked the handle and let the hinge open ever so slightly. I locked eyes with 4 men. Black uniforms. Police. I stepped out but made sure to close the door firmly behind me. 3 of them were great big fellas dressed in body armor that made them look like a trio of upright rhinoceroses. The fourth was hardly a man, no more than 19 years old. "Hello," he said, a youthful smile on his face. "We heard there was a family here. One that, perhaps, should not be." I don't, understand," I responded in broken Mandarin, despite that being one of the languages I actually do speak. "Oh, I think she's a little lost," he mocked before curving his hand around my face. He pulled me closer. I could taste the rancid fumes of his breath. "Do you want me to make things a bit clearer for you? Maybe my friends and I can give you a hands-on demonstration." The others chuckled. All the innocence his young appearance gave him faded away. Usually, I'd have broken this guy's fingers by this point. I don't like anyone touching me, especially not pricks like him. I couldn't afford to act like that, however. If I let them into the apartment, who knows what they would do with the family? If they got split up, it'd be my fault. "Please, sir, I don't, know what you're saying." I kept up the act. I needed them to think I was defenseless. Clueless. Stupid, even. If you really want power in a situation, you gotta let the other guy think he's on top. I faked a nervous tremble, and that satisfied him. I saw it in his eyes. He patted me lightly on the cheek and directed the walking rhinos to leave. He gave me one last look and then strolled off, chuckling to himself. I waited a few minutes, checked in on the family, and then headed off after the roaming policeman. I had to be sure that they weren't going to return to the apartment anytime soon. I stalked them for quite some time, and I managed to get a real clear idea about just the type of people they were. Nasty. Straight from the bottle nasty. In their minds, they owned those streets, and they had enough firepower to prove it. I started to deviate from my slow pursuit when I noticed just how many security cameras there were dotted about place. If those four managed to get their hands on some footage of me watching them, I'm certain they'd see it as a fine excuse to beat the shit out of me, and that just wouldn't be good for anyone now, would it? Since I was already out, I decided to make the most of it. I'm not the type of person you'd usually find in a bar, especially not in a town like this, but there's a first time for everything, right? The particular place I decided to swing by was called the 37 Lounge. It was a lousy old joint, but I didn't expect anything else. The dim light was snuffed out by the silver fog of tobacco smoke. An ill-looking man played a battered piano. I sat alone with my drink, watching everyone else go about their nights. Everyone was clearly much more at home here than I was. A particularly peculiar assortment of folks caught my attention. A group of well-dressed but mean-looking young men and an older lady in the final years of being middle-aged sat at a table together. The men clung on to her every word. They were hesitant to speak in case they accidentally interrupted her. This wasn't a romantic thing. Not at all. This woman had done something to not only win their respect, but gain their total idolization. She was either one hell of a kind lady or a real nasty piece of work. Whilst my eyes were fixed on that strange group, I failed to see that someone had sat down opposite me. I jumped slightly when I noticed the newcomer. "I didn't mean to frighten you," she apologized. "What do you want?" I asked her. "I came here for a drink. I saw you were by yourself. I sat down next to you. Is that okay?" I eased up slightly. She seemed nice enough. Sure, that's fine by me. What's your name?" "Zhao, you?" I glanced up at the security camera, which I suspected was staring back at me. "I think I'm going to keep that to myself if that's all right," I asserted. Zhao shrugged and attempted to adjust her manically tousled hair. "Whatever," she said. "It's your business. Be all mysterious if you want. Doesn't bother me. How come you're out here alone?" "I could ask you the same thing." "Okay, I'll tell you, but when I do, you better drop the enigmatic act." "I thought you said it doesn't bother you," I rebutted. "Shush. If you must know, I came here to meet my lover." "But they didn't show?" "Oh, no, he showed up. He's just outside." "What's the problem then?" I interrogated. I waited for an answer as she struggled to light a cigarette. "The problem is," she continued, having finally caught a spark, "his wife decided to follow him." "Ah, so that's why you're really sitting with me." "I'm your cover," I deduced. "Yeah, you got me. I know his wife. Used to be my teacher at school. She's a damn persistent lady, so I think it's gonna be a while until she leaves." How about we start passing the time by listening to you answer my question, eh? Your question, as in, why am I here alone? It's a long story. I've got hours. You wouldn't believe half of it even if I told you. Trust me, I'm very open-minded, she persuaded. Fine, I gave in. I'm here alone because for the last 3 years, I haven't stayed in one place long enough to make any real friends. I've been all over the world. Chile, Egypt, Jordan, Peru, Morocco, hell, even Antarctica. Where'd you get the money to afford all that? I saved up. I used to have a pretty high-paying job. Doing what? Accounting, I said. Zhao smirked. You're a good liar, she laughed. But I'm a better one. What did you really do? I tried to come up with another lie, but then what would be the point? She'd catch on straight away. Some people are tricky like that. My superpower doesn't work on them. I decided to tell her the truth. Why the hell not? I used to deal with aliens, I admitted bluntly. Aliens like illegal immigrants? No, like little green men in UFOs shooting you in the face with laser beams. Bullshit, she denied. Can't you tell that I'm not lying? I can see that you believe what you're saying. Doesn't mean you're telling the truth. How would you even end up getting a job like that? I woke up in a prison cell babbling some doohickey about aliens. A few hours later, I was offered the job in return for my release. A prison cell? What did you do? Zhao leant back cautiously. She was starting to reckon that I was bad company. I have no idea what I did. I don't remember nothing from before that moment. That's why I'm here. If I can find even the slightest bit of information on my life before, I can start putting the pieces back together, taking back control. Well, as long as you didn't do anything in your past to upset them, then I don't care. By them, she meant the 4 men who'd just walked in. The stomping of rhino hooves echoed out over the discordant jazz piano. It was the 4 cops from earlier. They strolled through the bar, watching over their territory. The youngest one walked past us, putting his hand on mine for just a moment before letting go, marking his territory. Friend of yours? Questioned Zhao. I shook my head. The 4 split up, circling one of the tables. The table with the old woman and her boys. One of the rhinos began talking to the woman, demanding something. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but if I had to make a guess, I'd say he was probably after money. Protection money. You know you fucked up when the police force starts acting like the criminals. Thing is, though, these cops weren't criminals. Sure, they were breaking the law, but they didn't have the mindset of lawbreakers. These cops were so coked up on power that they weren't expecting nobody to fight back, especially not this lady and what looked like her sons and grandsons. The woman slowly got up from her chair. An officer stepped forward, putting a hand on her shoulder in an attempt to force her back down. She didn't like that. Not one bit. She moved out of his grip with all the grace and ferocity of a pissed-off ballerina. Just like that, she had the power. She held what at first appeared to be a gun to the underneath of the youngest cop's chin. It took me a second to realize that the gun had no barrel. It just rounded off where the end should have been. Weird little thing. Her face barked commands, but I couldn't figure out what was being said. No one else seemed to be too bothered by what was taking place. No one except Zhao, that is. We need to leave now, she insisted. Hang on, I want to see how this plays out. No, she cried as she clutched my arm. We are leaving. What's got you so riled up? I'm not even sure that's a real gun. Don't you know who she is? That's Shu. Shu? I questioned. She's just really not someone you should be associated with. I looked back at Shu. Sure, she had some sort of weapon pointed at a man's throat, but she looked harmless enough. Even sort of sweet. I couldn't believe that she was any sort of threat. Shu looked dissatisfied. Zhao almost certain that she was gonna shoot that guy, but the armored officers weren't doing anything to stop her. If they weren't worried, why was Zhao? Mind you, maybe the cops weren't unconcerned. Maybe they were terrified. Shu pulled the trigger. Nothing seemed to happen. Then the young cop began to struggle and squirm, soon collapsing to the floor. Shu carefully went down with him, pressing the gun forcefully into the side of his neck. He grasped at the legs of the rhinos, but they didn't do a thing to help. That's when his silent scream started. His eyes went all red, bloodshot. Then he went all red, his veins pushing at the surface of his skin. His eyes burst like balloons, pricked by needles. He arched and contorted in brainless pain as crimson crystals pushed out through his flesh and tore away his body. After a few more seconds of suffering, there was nothing left but diamonds and blood. The rhinos went to run away, but they had no chance. Their armor couldn't protect them. 3 pulls of the trigger and each man fell dead. The club went silent. Everyone turned to stare. Even the sickly pianist stopped to see what would happen next. Hugh casually slipped the gun back into the pocket of her dark frock coat and sat back down as if nothing had happened at all. Everyone else took the hint and carried on with their evenings. The piano was played once more and order was restored. "What the hell just happened?" hissed Zhao. "She turned that cop into fucking gemstones! How is that even possible?" "Still don't believe in aliens?" I half teased. "I don't know what to believe. This ain't my business, nor is it yours," she stated definitively as she stubbed out her cigarette, leaving a black mark on the cheap table surface. "Sorry, Zhao, but I'm afraid this is exactly my business. That gun sure isn't from this planet. God knows where she picked it up, but she's got no right to keep it." "So what, you're just gonna take it from her?" scoffed my drinking partner. "Yeah, more or less. Wanna help?" I offered with my best attempt at a charming smile. I'd seen the same thing done by my boss back when I was fighting aliens with Shadowwood. Put on a smile and normal people will jump at the opportunity of adventure. I have quite a few problems with my fellow humans, but that's one trait I always admire. Zhao got up from her seat. No, of course I don't want to help. Are you kidding? That's fucking insane. You're going to get yourself killed, Stacy. Seriously. After that, she couldn't have left in more of a hurry. In her rush, she failed to notice a man who was bent over, picking up the jewels that were once a cop. Her heel clipped his head as she ran. Still, that didn't deter her never-ending quest to get as far the hell away from me as possible. Maybe inviting people to steal alien weapons from mobsters isn't the best way to make friends. For the second time that night, I found myself stalking a group of lowlifes across the city of Shuaiding. After leaving the 37 Lounge, Shu and her boys hit up a few more bars and even an underground rave. They were out for business this time, not for pleasure. Turns out they had their fingers in quite a few criminal pies. Drug dealing, gun smuggling, you name it, and these folks did it. They were the go-to guys of the Chinese underworld. While I waited for them to lead me to their hideout, I started wondering about Shu's gun, how it worked. I've seen some pretty weird shit, but a guy getting turned into precious minerals was fairly out there, even for me. You ever heard that thing about turning coal into diamonds if you heat it up enough? Well, that's how I reckon the gun works. Of course, it's not as simple as just getting a piece of coal and putting your lighter to it. The carbon in the coal, when put under extreme pressure, crystallizes and turns into diamond. Newsflash, we're made out of carbon too. My thinking is that Shu's little gun is some sort of pressure gun. She crystallized the young cop just for the hell of it, I guess. Then, with the other 3, all she needed to do was apply a little pressure and give them all heart attacks. That's why it was so important that I got a hold of that gun. It's bad enough that it was in the possession of a ruthless gangster, but what if it ended up belonging to someone with bigger ideas, a bit more scope? They'd be able to turn buildings into dust, blow up oil rigs, maybe even superheat the oceans if they tried hard enough. Also, the thing was probably alien in origin, which meant by nature it should be in my more capable hands. They got to their hideout, an old plastic surgery center, at around 3 a.m. A peeling poster of a smiling Botox face was still plastered above the doorway. I slipped in through an unlocked back entrance. They clearly haven't been using this place for long. The tacky decor and surgical equipment used by the previous occupants was yet to be thrown out. The floor was littered with needles. The gangsters' voices echoed out from one of the operating rooms. They were laughing about something. I crept through the gloomy corridor, holding on to the shadows for dear life. I wasn't 100% sure what my game plan was. I just had to get that gun. My foot hit something solid. It was one of those steel medical trolleys. Propelled by my accidental kick, it drifted down the corridor for some time before tumbling with a dangerously loud clang. The distant laughing stopped. I dashed over to the toppled trolley and pocketed a handful of scalpels that had fallen from it. A door swung open. Shu, flanked by 2 men, emerged from the operating room and marched towards me. I held a scalpel above my head. Although, if we did get into a scrape, I know I'd only manage to get a few slashes in before I ended up like that cop at that bar. Turns out I didn't even get that far. Shu fired at the scalpel and it was crushed instantly. I considered taking out another one of the blades which I had stashed away in my pocket, but I didn't want to make things worse. "What are you doing here?" asked Shu without a drop of aggression. I took a wrong turn." "You sure did," threatened a man with a dragon tattooed on the side of his face. Now, Shu glanced at the fella. "Let's not make our guests feel unwelcome. Although I will say, I don't believe for a moment that you're here by accident. You seem awfully calm for someone who just stumbled in." Cover blown. Again. "I'm usually good at this, believe me. I'm just here because I don't want anyone to get hurt," I reasoned. "That gun, I don't know where you found it, but it's way beyond your control. You don't know what it really is." Shu chuckled. "Found it? No, it was paid to me. I earned it. As for what it really is, it's alien, obviously." "So, why don't you give us a real good reason why she shouldn't use it on you?" taunted the tattooed guy. "Because you need me," I stated. "Told you I was usually good at this kind of thing. I wasn't scared by the gun because I already knew it was alien. That's why I came here in the first place. You said it was given to you as payment, and I imagine whoever you're doing jobs for will pay you with more of the same. So, what if they pay you with a piece of tech you can't figure out, or they just give you a dud? You'll need someone who knows their way around this sort of stuff. Someone like me. If you keep me alive, I can help you." The tattoo guy scoffed. "What's stopping you from betraying us at the first chance you get?" "Because if she does," started Shu, "I'll get you to cut off her fingers and feed them to her. Do you understand, new friend?" I nodded. I realized I was in deep shit. Deep shit. "Well then," Shu picked up where she left off, a smile on her face. "Glad we have come to an agreement. Tomorrow we have to collect some merchandise for our benefactors. You will go with my boys and see how we do things. Once we receive payment, you can check it out and make sure it's all okay. All right?" "Sure, yeah," I spat out, still recovering from Shu's emotional whiplash. How can someone go from placid, even cheery, to downright fucking deranged in the space of a few moments, and then snap right back to normal? What type of person was she? Oh well, I had to go along with it if I wanted to keep my fingers intact. "What time do you want me here?" I tried to tease out a smile of my own, but no dice. There was no way I could brighten this situation. "Oh, don't worry," she spoke casually. "You don't have to leave." The woman struck my skull with the back end of the pressure gun. Darkness bloomed in the side of my eyes. I clawed at perception, but I couldn't get a good enough grip. After a few more seconds of fighting, I plummeted into unconsciousness. I awoke to the unsteady trundling of a beaten-up truck. I was slumped along the back seats. Felt like someone had just thrown me in there. I tried to get up, but the tight bindings around my wrists bit back. Eventually, I managed to drag myself upright. "Mornin'," mumbled the tattooed guy from the driver's seat. I recognized one of Shu's other boys that was sat shotgun. I leant back into the trash leather seat. I couldn't escape, so I thought I might as well enjoy the ride. "Oh yeah, I should probably let you know that I'm gonna escape. You didn't think I was actually gonna help these guys, did you?" I leant my face against the window and watched the Chinese countryside race by. Every now and again, I'd see someone working in the fields, the afternoon sun beating down on them. This was a completely different world from the gray mess that was Shuiding City, the city where I'd spent the last month and a half. The city where my stuff was. Shit. If I was going to make a run for it now, I'd have to say goodbye to my belongings. Still, better to run with nothing than to have to work for these assholes just to keep my body parts attached. I was flung into the headrest in front as the truck swerved onto a dirt track. The trail took us right through a field. The view was blocked out by a solid wall of rice grass. "Remember," said the driver, "Shoot is only keeping you alive because she thinks you're useful. I don't share those feelings. You're to check the merchandise and the payment, nothing else. You slip up just once, just in the slightest way, and you're done. Got that?" I nodded. We pulled out into a clearing, a perfect circle of dead grass. If I didn't know more about aliens, I'd say that we were in a crop circle. The guy in the passenger seat took a handgun from the glove box and signaled for me to let myself out. I fumbled at the handle until finally the door opened and I fell out. My jaw impacted the barren earth. I tasted blood. The two men stood above me, giggling like a pair of school bullies. Real funny. Tattoo guy hoisted me up roughly. "What's your name, little lady?" he asked. "Stacy. You?" I replied placidly. There was no point in causing a fuss now. "Fung," he grunted, having already lost any interest in talking to me. He faced the sky. I squinted, looking for something. The other man was setting up some sort of device. I took the opportunity and started trying to wriggle one of those scalpels out of my pocket. A blade poked out. "Hello, old friend." I brought my wrist to the blade and slowly started cutting away at the bindings. "No!" shouted Fang. The other man responded by pressing a button on his machine, and then it was night. Not just dark, but night. There wasn't any light pollution this far out. I'd never seen so many stars. 5 glowing red cubes burned above us. Those weren't stars. They were way too close and getting closer. I couldn't let myself get distracted, though. I sliced at the bindings faster than before. One final cut, and the rope fell to the floor. I turned to book it through the fields. If I could make it to the truck first, I'd be able to escape this whole mess. My objective, my whole life changed when the light came back. A blast, like the firing of a pistol, beckoned the return of the day. The red cubes crashed to the ground, throwing up clods of dirt upon impact. They stood motionless for a moment before fading away entirely, revealing that something was contained in each cube. I could see clearly what they were, but my mind refused to accept it. They couldn't be. They were children. Inside each cube was a child. Fang grasped 2 by the neck, like a hunter picking up dead birds. "Who are they?" I asked. I was wasting valuable time, but I had to know what the fuck was going on. Fang answered, I wish he didn't. "They're what we're here to collect," he said. "They're the merchandise."